There comes a point when enough is truly enough. It's not always a sudden explosion, though it can feel like one. More often it's like a slow, persistent ache that finally becomes unbearable, a dull throb in the soul demanding attention. We find ourselves standing at a profound crossroads, a place where the familiar, worn-out path of quiet endurance is no longer a viable option. The discomfort of our current reality, the one we've perhaps tolerated for far too long out of fear or habit, suddenly outweighs the fear of the unknown. It overshadows the intimidating prospect of what it might take to forge a new way forward. This isn't just a fleeting frustration, it's a deep internal shift, a cellular knowing that something fundamental has to give way. It is the soul's urgent cry for something more, something better, something true. This powerful enough moment often brews quietly beneath the surface for a considerable time, a silent rebellion against the myriad ways we've allowed ourselves to be diminished or devalued. It is born from countless tiny concessions, those seemingly small paper cuts, to the spirit that over time accumulate and bleed us dry of our precious vitality and joy. We might have rationalized these compromises, minimized the impact of dismissive words or actions, or even denied the growing unease that gnawed at our peace for weeks, months, or perhaps even years. We might have told ourselves we were simply being too sensitive, or that this was just the way things were, an unchangeable reality. But a persistent inner voice, that knowing part of us, keeps whispering that this isn't right, that we deserve more than this constant state of depletion. For many of us, this critical breaking point crystallizes around the way we are treated by others. More painfully, it centers on the stark realization of how we have, often unconsciously, allowed ourselves to be treated. It's that sudden gut-wrenching moment of clarity when we see that the patterns of disrespect or disregard we experience are not merely random occurrences. Instead, they are often direct reflections of the boundaries we haven't dared to set or consistently enforce. We begin to see, with uncomfortable precision, how we've inadvertently taught people that it's acceptable to overlook our needs, to dismiss our feelings, or to undervalue our contributions and our very presence. This clarity can be jarring, bringing with it a potent mix of anger, deep sadness, and perhaps even a touch of shame. Yet within this painful awareness lies the potent seed of our liberation. So I want to share my story with you today. It's a story about that very breaking point, that raw, vulnerable moment of realizing enough, and what unfolded in the days, weeks, and months that followed. This isn't presented as a tale of seamless perfection, nor is it a blueprint for a quick fix, because true change rarely works that way. Instead, it's a real, sometimes messy, and ultimately liberating account of how I stopped allowing other people, challenging circumstances, or even my own harsh inner critic to define my worth and dictate my internal peace. I learned, step by difficult step, to untangle myself from entrenched patterns of poor treatment, not primarily by trying to change others, but by profoundly changing myself. Sharing this feels vulnerable, yet it also feels incredibly important. My path involved learning to finally, unequivocally, stop letting people treat me poorly. It meant addressing the subtle ways I had allowed my boundaries to be crossed, and my voice to be silenced. It was about truly starting from the ground up, to honor my own inherent worth, a worth that isn't, and never was, dependent on external validation, achievements, or the approval of others. And crucially, it was about the conscious and deliberate act of taking my power back. This power, as I've come to understand it, isn't about dominance or control over anyone else. Rather, it's about self-sovereignty, personal agency, and the quiet, unshakable courage to live authentically, guided by my own values and truth. It is the bedrock of inner peace. If any of this description resonates deep within you, if you find yourself feeling bone-tired, truly exhausted from the constant draining weight of being disrespected, overlooked, or made to feel inexplicably small, then please know this story is especially for you. If you've sensed that slow, insidious erosion of your spirit, that gradual dimming of your own unique light because of how others interact with you, or how you've learned to interact with yourself, please understand that you are not imagining it, and more importantly, you are certainly not stuck in that place forever, no matter how permanent it may feel right now. It wasn't a single dramatic event that first alerted me. There was no sudden clap of thunder, no earth-shattering revelation that shook me awake in an instant. Instead, it was a slow, insidious creep, like a fog rolling in almost unnoticed, until I could barely see the path ahead. I began to realize with a growing sense of unease just how low I had allowed my own internal bar to be set. This wasn't about ambition in my career or grand life goals, not initially. It was about the fundamental expectation of how I deserved to be treated, to be seen, to be valued simply as a human being. The truth was, I had set that bar so low it was practically buried under the dirt, almost invisible to my own eyes. This realization dawned through a persistent, gnawing feeling of depletion. I was constantly drained, not just physically tired from the demands of daily life, but soul tired, a weariness that clung to me like a heavy cloak. It felt as if my energy was perpetually leaking out, siphoned off by interactions and situations that left me feeling diminished. I found myself frequently overlooked, my contributions minimized, my voice seemingly unheard in rooms where others spoke freely and with authority. It was as if I was fading into the background of my own life, a supporting character rather than the lead. This subtle invisibility chipped away at my sense of self, making me question my own presence and impact in the world around me. Then came the blame, sometimes overt, but often so subtle it was hard to pinpoint, yet its effects were deeply felt. It was in the slight shift of responsibility, the insinuation that if things went wrong, perhaps I was somehow at fault or not strong enough or too sensitive. I started to internalize this, carrying a burden of responsibility that wasn't always mine to bear. This constant state of being overlooked, frequently drained, and often subtly blamed, created a toxic internal environment. It was a quiet erosion of my spirit, happening so gradually that I almost didn't notice the ground crumbling beneath my feet until I was dangerously close to the edge of a very steep drop. The most confusing part was that for a long time I genuinely didn't see it clearly. I brushed off the exhaustion as just being busy. I didn't consciously choose to live this way, to accept a life that felt perpetually lukewarm, sometimes dipping into uncomfortably cold. No one ever does. Yet, somewhere along the line, just okay had become my standard. I had convinced myself that this was acceptable, perhaps even all I could realistically expect from life and relationships. The vibrant colors of what had faded into muted tones of what, and I had stopped striving for anything brighter. This acceptance of mediocrity in how I was treated was not a sign of contentment. It was a symptom of a deeply buried fear, a fear of asking for more and being met with rejection or worse, ridicule. So I settled. The bar for how I allowed others to engage with me, to speak to me, to consider my needs, had not just been lowered, it had practically sunk into the abyss. I look back now and see with painful clarity how I accommodated disrespect, how I made excuses for inconsiderate behavior, how I twisted myself into knots to avoid conflict, even if it meant sacrificing my own peace and well-being. This wasn't kindness or patience, it was a profound lack of self-protection. I had forgotten, or perhaps never truly learned, that my needs were valid, my feelings mattered, and my voice deserved to be heard with respect, not as a demand, but as a fundamental right. This low bar became a self-fulfilling prophecy, attracting more of the same. This normalization of poor treatment is a subtle poison. It seeps into your system so slowly that you adapt to its presence, mistaking its toxic effects for your own inadequacy. I began to believe that perhaps this was just how relationships worked, how life was meant to be. I saw others navigate their worlds with apparent ease and assertiveness, and I wondered what was inherently different about me. Why did I seem to attract these dynamics? The truth, which took a long time to surface, was that I wasn't attracting them as much as I was them, creating the space for them to exist by not setting firm boundaries. I had become complicit in my own unhappiness by failing to define what was unacceptable. The tragedy of setting the bar so low is that you start to believe that's all you're worth. The turning point didn't arrive with a detailed plan or a sudden surge of unwavering confidence. It arrived as a whisper, a fragile question that bubbled up from the deepest, most suppressed part of my being. I was in the midst of a particularly draining interaction, feeling that familiar cocktail of frustration, invisibility, and a touch of self-blame. I was tired, so profoundly tired of the same old script playing out. And then, almost involuntarily, the question formed in my mind, clear and sharp amidst the usual fog of resignation. Why am I accepting this? It was so simple, yet it felt like a seismic shift within me, a crack of light in a very dark room. That question, why am I accepting this, hung in the air of my mind, refusing to be dismissed. It wasn't accusatory towards others, not initially. It was turned inwards, a genuine inquiry into my own motivations, my own choices, my own participation in these painful dynamics. Why had I tolerated feeling so small for so long? What fear had kept me silent and compliant? What belief system had I subscribed to that told me this was my lot in life? For the first time, I wasn't just feeling the pain, I was the pain, questioning its necessity, its inevitability. It was the beginning of reclaiming my agency, my power to choose differently. The immediate impact of that question was profound. It was as if a spell had been broken. Suddenly, the excuses I had made for others and for myself seemed flimsy and transparent. The normalization of poor treatment began to unravel. What had once felt like an unchangeable reality now appeared as a series of choices, many of them mine. It didn't make the situation less painful, but it did introduce a revolutionary idea. If I had, through my acceptance, played a role in creating this reality, then perhaps I also had the power to change it. This tiny spark of realization felt like the first breath of fresh air after being underwater for too long. That single question, why am I accepting this, became my mantra, my compass. For the longest time, the very idea of setting a boundary felt inherently mean. It was like I was purposefully choosing to be difficult or unkind. I believed that good people, kind people, were always agreeable and accommodating. The word no felt sharp and foreign on my tongue, something to be avoided at almost any cost. This deep-seated belief wasn't something I consciously chose. It was learned, absorbed from years of subtle cues and overt messages about the virtues of selflessness, often at the expense of self. I had become a dedicated people-pleaser, convinced that my worth was tied to my ability to make others happy and comfortable, even if it made me profoundly uncomfortable. It was a heavy cloak to wear, this constant performance of nice. The guilt that accompanied even the thought of asserting my needs was immense. If I considered saying no to a request or voicing a preference that might inconvenience someone else, a wave of anxiety would wash over me. I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility for other people's feelings. If they were disappointed or upset by my boundary, I felt like I had failed them, like I was the source of their discomfort. This internal conflict was exhausting. It was a constant battle between my own slowly suffocating needs and the powerful, ingrained desire to be liked, to be approved of, to avoid any semblance of conflict. I was terrified of being perceived as selfish or uncaring if I dared to draw a line. This fear led to a life filled with countless small concessions that slowly eroded my sense of self. I would say yes when I meant no. I would stay silent when I longed to speak up. I would overextend myself, pushing past my own limits, all in the name of being nice and agreeable. The cost of this constant accommodation was steep. My energy was depleted, my personal goals were neglected, and a quiet resentment began to fester beneath the surface. I was so busy trying to be everything to everyone that I was becoming nothing to myself. This wasn't genuine kindness. It was a survival strategy born out of fear, and it was a strategy that was slowly but surely failing me, leaving me feeling hollow. The realization that this path was unsustainable trickled in slowly, like water seeping through cracks in a dam. There were moments of clarity, often after feeling particularly drained or disrespected, where I'd glimpsed the truth. This relentless pursuit of nice wasn't making me a better person, it was making me a more depleted one. It wasn't fostering genuine connection, it was creating relationships based on an inauthentic version of myself. The first inkling that boundaries might not be about meanness, but about something else entirely, perhaps something vital for survival, began to take root. It was a fragile thought, easily overshadowed by years of conditioning, but it was a start, a tiny seed of a new understanding. Learning to say no was without a doubt the first crucial step in the long journey of saying yes to myself. It sounds so simple, just one little word. Yet, for someone steeped in people-pleasing, no felt like launching 1,000 ships of disapproval. I had to fundamentally reframe what that word meant. It wasn't a weapon of rejection, it wasn't a sign of selfishness. Instead, it was becoming a tool of self-preservation, a declaration that my time, my energy, and my well-being mattered. Saying no to unreasonable demands, to draining commitments, or to interactions that left me feeling small was incredibly difficult at first, but it was also profoundly liberating. Each no was a small act of reclaiming my own life. With each hesitant no, I began to carve out space to breathe, space to think, space to simply be without the crushing weight of others' expectations. Before, my life felt cluttered, overfilled with obligations I had reluctantly agreed to. There was no room for my own priorities, my own passions, or even for quiet moments of rest and reflection. Saying no acted like a decluttering process for my schedule and my spirit. It created openings where I could finally begin to hear my own voice, to identify my own needs, and to consider what truly brought me joy and fulfillment. This newfound space was initially unnerving, almost too quiet, but it soon became a sanctuary for self-discovery. My first attempts at saying no were clumsy, and often accompanied by a racing heart and a flood of apologies. I'd over-explain, I'd waver, I'd feel an intense urge to backtrack and say yes just to smooth things over. Sometimes people were surprised or even a little put out. That was hard. It confirmed my old fears. But something else happened too. With each no, even the shaky ones, I felt a tiny flicker of empowerment, a small surge of strength. I realized that the world didn't end. People, for the most part, adjusted. And most importantly, I survived the discomfort, emerging a little stronger, a little more aligned with myself than before. Gradually, I began to understand a profound truth. Every time I said no to something that wasn't right for me, I was simultaneously saying a powerful yes to myself. Saying no to working late without reason was saying yes to my family or my rest. Saying no to a one-sided friendship was saying yes to relationships built on mutual respect. Saying no to negative self-talk was saying yes to self-compassion. This shift in perspective was revolutionary. No was no longer a word of deprivation, but one of profound self-affirmation. It was the key to unlocking the door to my own well-being and peace of mind, a way to honor my own precious energy. Boundaries, the blueprint of self-respect. The concept of boundaries began to transform in my mind. I had once envisioned them as tall, impenetrable walls designed to keep people out, to isolate me. This felt lonely and harsh, but I started to see that this was a misunderstanding. Healthy boundaries are not about shutting the world out. Instead, they are more like the lines on a blueprint, clearly defining the space that is. They delineate where I end and someone else begins. They communicate my values, my limits, and my needs. They are not about rejecting others. They are about respectfully defining and protecting myself, ensuring I have a safe and sacred space to be who I truly am. Boundaries, I learned, are a fundamental form of self-respect. They are the silent and sometimes spoken teachers that show others how we expect to be treated. When we don't have clear boundaries, or when we fail to enforce them, we inadvertently send the message that it's okay for our needs to be overlooked, or our limits to be crossed. Respect from others often begins with the respect we demonstrate for ourselves. By establishing and maintaining clear boundaries, we are essentially saying, I value myself enough to protect my well-being, my time, and my emotional health. This act of self-valuation is incredibly powerful and often shifts how others perceive and interact with us. It's crucial to understand the difference between setting a boundary and outright rejecting a person. A boundary is about behavior. It's about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in how someone interacts with you. It's not a statement about the other person's inherent worth, nor is it necessarily a desire to end a relationship. It is, however, a profound act of self-care and self-preservation. You are protecting your energy, your values, and your mental and emotional stability. Sometimes this means creating distance, but often it simply means communicating your needs clearly and consistently, allowing relationships to exist on healthier, more respectful terms for everyone involved. The long-term benefits of embracing boundaries are immeasurable. While the initial process can be uncomfortable, even painful, the rewards are profound. Healthier, more balanced relationships begin to flourish, built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than obligation or fear. Your self-worth grows as you consistently honor your own needs. A deep sense of integrity and inner peace replaces the chaos and resentment that came from being boundaryless. Ultimately, learning that boundaries aren't mean, but are in fact a deep expression of self-love and respect for the sanctity of connection, was a pivotal moment in reclaiming my power. They are not just lines in the sand, they are affirmations of who you are. For so long, I had looked outside myself for value. My worth felt like something others held in their hands, to be given or withheld. The decision to rebuild started with a quiet shift, a turning inward. I realized self-worth wasn't a prize to be won, it was a garden within me waiting to be tended. This journey wouldn't begin with grand, sweeping changes. No, it started with small, almost imperceptible acts of internal refocusing, a gentle commitment made only to myself, for myself. This path felt unfamiliar, even a little lonely at first, but it also felt profoundly right, the true work finally commencing. It was time to become my own wellspring of validation, my own unwavering anchor in any storm. The idea of daily affirmations surfaced early on, At first, it felt incredibly awkward, almost ridiculous. Standing there speaking positive words to my own reflection felt forced. A skeptical voice in my head scoffed, whispering doubts. This is silly, this will never actually work. But my desire for genuine change, for a life where I felt whole, was a far more powerful current. So I persisted. I chose simple, potent phrases. I am worthy of respect. I am capable and strong. I deeply approve of who I am. Repeating these words each day felt like carefully planting tiny, hopeful seeds in barren soil. I committed to this ritual even on days when the words felt like empty echoes, when belief was a distant shore. Consistency became my silent, steadfast ally. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, these affirmations began to sculpt my inner landscape. The relentless chorus of negative self-talk, that familiar inner critic, didn't vanish overnight. That would have been too easy. But its voice started to lose its sharp edge, its volume gradually decreasing. The affirmations became gentle, persistent counter-melodies to the old, harsh refrains. With time, they started to feel less like hollow pronouncements and more like emerging truths, like possibilities I could grow into. My mind, almost unconsciously, began to scan my experiences for evidence that supported these new, kinder beliefs. This was the quiet, profound magic of repetition. My internal dialogue was subtly, powerfully being re-scripted, one positive phrase at a time. This internal work soon overflowed beyond just words. The affirmations acted as a key, unlocking the door to consistent, tangible action. Small acts of self-care, things I once dismissed as indulgent or selfish, slowly transformed into non-negotiable expressions of self-respect. Taking a quiet walk in nature, firmly saying no to extra demands that would drain me, fiercely protecting moments of quiet solitude to simply be. These were no longer luxuries, they were essential practices. Each choice, no matter how small, reinforced the burgeoning message, I matter. My needs are valid and deserving of attention. This created a gentle upward spiral, a quiet momentum building my self-worth from the inside out. Rebuilding self-worth also meant taking a hard look at my connections. I had to acknowledge that some ties in my life were not nurturing. They were, in fact, actively depleting my energy and spirit. These were the relationships that consistently left me feeling diminished, questioned, or utterly unseen. Admitting this was a painful, difficult process. Often these were people I had known for a significant time, individuals woven into the fabric of my history. Yet, their presence often felt like a heavy, oppressive cloud. My energy would noticeably dip in their company. Their words, whether subtly veiled or openly critical, frequently carried barbs that stung long after the conversation ended. Honesty with myself, raw and unfiltered, was the crucial first step in this challenging but vital pruning. The fear associated with ending these connections, or even just creating distance, was immense. Letting go felt like an act of betrayal, or perhaps worse, like a personal failure in maintaining a relationship. Guilt became a constant, heavy companion during this period. Thoughts swirled. What if I inflict pain on them? What if, by cutting these ties, I condemn myself to loneliness? Such anxieties kept me tethered to unhealthy dynamics for far too long. I obsessed over their potential reactions, their anger, their sadness, their disappointment. The very thought of direct confrontation sent waves of terror through me. Those deeply ingrained people-pleasing habits, learned over a lifetime, do not surrender easily, but the cumulative cost of maintaining these toxic ties was becoming far too high for my soul to bear. The actual process of pruning these connections varied. It wasn't always a single dramatic severing. Sometimes it was a more gradual fading out. I initiated less contact. I kept interactions shorter, more superficial. I consciously chose not to engage in the old, familiar, draining patterns of conversation or behavior. Other situations, however, demanded a clearer, more direct approach. A conversation where I had to articulate my needs and my decision to step back. This was incredibly difficult, requiring a courage I wasn't sure I possessed. There were tears, my own, and sometimes theirs. There was profound discomfort. I had to learn to sit with that discomfort, to breathe through it, to soothe my own emotional turbulence. It felt like soul surgery, undeniably painful in the moment, but absolutely necessary for long-term healing and growth. Then came the surprise. An unexpected and profound lightness followed the storm. Once the initial emotional waves subsided, a quietness settled in, and with it, space. So much liberating space. Where once there had been a constant undercurrent of anxiety and a sense of dread before certain interactions, a gentle sense of peace began to tentatively bloom. My energy levels, once chronically low, started to recover. I found I wasn't constantly bracing myself for impact, for the next subtle put-down or unreasonable demand. This newfound freedom felt exhilarating. It wasn't about celebrating the loss of a person, but about creating vital room for healthier, reciprocal connections to form, room for my own inner peace to take root, room for my own light to shine brightly, no longer dimmed or overshadowed. I began to truly understand the profound power of my environment. The places I inhabited, the atmospheres I exposed myself to, deeply impacted my fragile, rebuilding self-worth. Certain settings, certain dynamics just felt inherently wrong for my healing. They seemed to echo those old, painful feelings of inadequacy and smallness. They were often filled with subtle triggers or populated by individuals who simply didn't or couldn't see the person I was striving to become. A crucial realization dawned. I had a choice in this. I didn't have to passively remain in rooms or situations where my spirit felt systematically suffocated or dismissed. I could actively seek out and choose environments that felt supportive, uplifting, and nourishing, like a wise gardener choosing fertile, sunlit soil for precious seeds. This realization sparked an active search for these nourishing spaces. It became a conscious practice of discernment. I started deliberately seeking out places and situations where I felt my shoulders physically relax, where I could take a deep, cleansing breath without tension, places where I felt genuinely seen, not scrutinized or judged. Sometimes this sanctuary was found in the quiet, anonymous embrace of a library corner. Other times it was the restorative power of a walk in nature, surrounded by trees and open sky. It could be a carefully chosen, supportive group, or simply the intentional peace cultivated within the walls of my own home. These spaces became my havens, my emotional recharging stations. They were absolutely crucial for reinforcing the new, tender messages of self-worth I was so diligently trying to internalize. As my internal landscape shifted, the kinds of people I felt drawn to also began to change. It was a natural evolution. I started to connect more deeply with individuals who mirrored my growing self-respect and validated my journey. These were people who listened with open hearts, without an immediate urge to fix or judge. They were the ones who genuinely celebrated my small victories and offered sincere encouragement when I faltered. Their presence wasn't about trying to mold me or change me. They were simply seeing me, acknowledging my essence. These connections felt authentic, balanced, and reciprocal. They gently showed me what healthy, unwavering support truly felt and looked like. This was my new tribe, a circle of warmth and acceptance. This entire journey of rebuilding self-worth, I came to understand, was never about cultivating arrogance or an inflated sense of self. It was fundamentally about alignment. It was about aligning with my true, authentic self, my genuine needs, my core values, my deepest desires. True self-worth isn't about puffing yourself up or thinking you are superior to others. It is the quiet, unshakable internal knowing that you are inherently enough, precisely as you are, flaws and strengths combined. Choosing safe spaces and surrounding myself with supportive, uplifting people wasn't a selfish act. It was an act of profound self-alignment. It was about courageously creating a life where my inner truth and my outer reality could finally, peacefully coexist. This alignment, I discovered, is the very essence of true and lasting peace. As I consistently practiced honoring myself, something profound began to shift deep within my core. It was more than just the daily affirmations or the conscious setting of boundaries. A new way of being started to take root, an internal resonance that hummed with quiet strength. This wasn't something I had to actively strive for each moment. It began to feel like my natural state. The feeling of worthiness settled into my bones, into the very rhythm of my breath. It was no longer an intellectual concept I was trying to convince myself of. It was becoming an embodied truth, a solid ground beneath my feet, steadying me from the inside out. This intrinsic sense of value became my new quiet compass. This internal transformation soon began to express itself outwardly in ways I hadn't even consciously intended. My physical posture started to change. I found myself standing taller, my shoulders naturally relaxing away from their usual tense position near my ears. My gaze became more direct, more open. I could meet the eyes of others with a calm, gentle assurance that had previously eluded me. Even my voice discovered a different quality. It grew steadier, clearer, carrying my words with a conviction that surprised me. These were not forced affectations. They were the natural, visible manifestations of an inner world that was finally aligning with self-respect and genuine self-acceptance. The old fears and anxieties, those relentless companions of my past, began to lose their suffocating grip. They didn't vanish completely, for that would be an unrealistic expectation. Echoes of self-doubt still whispered from time to time. However, their power to overwhelm me, to send me spiraling back into familiar patterns of insecurity, had significantly weakened. I could now observe these feelings with a degree of detachment, almost like watching a distant storm cloud. I could acknowledge their presence without letting them dictate my actions or define my state of being. Their clamor was fading, replaced by a more resilient inner quiet. A newfound clarity began to permeate my thoughts, guiding my decisions with a quiet certainty. The constant internal debate, the endless cycle of second-guessing that had once consumed so much of my mental energy, started to subside. Choices, whether big or small, no longer felt like agonizing battles. An intuitive sense of what was right for me, what was truly aligned with my well-being, began to emerge more consistently. This clarity wasn't harsh or judgmental. It was a gentle yet firm current, confidently pulling me forward, away from confusion, and towards a path that felt authentically my own. The internal noise was finally giving way to an inner knowing. The world reflects how others responded. It was truly fascinating to witness how this internal shift created ripples in my external world. As I began to inhabit this new sense of self, the way people responded to me started to subtly yet undeniably transform. It was as if the universe itself was reorganizing to mirror my inner state. Some interactions became noticeably smoother, imbued with a level of respect I hadn't experienced before. Conversely, other dynamics, particularly those built on my old patterns of compliance, became strained. This was a clear indication that the work I was doing internally was indeed having a tangible impact on my reality. The world was reflecting my change. Some individuals, those who were accustomed to my previous tendencies to people-please or diminish myself, seemed taken aback. There were moments of confusion, perhaps even subtle resistance, from those who preferred the old me. They might have tried, consciously or unconsciously, to pull me back into the familiar dynamics where they held more sway. These instances were challenging. They tested the strength of my new resolve, reminding me that not everyone would embrace or understand my transformation. Holding my ground required courage and a steadfast commitment to this new empowered version of myself, even when it felt uncomfortable. On the other hand, a beautiful thing began to happen. I started to attract and connect with individuals who genuinely valued authenticity, mutual respect, and healthy communication. Conversations with these people felt more genuine, more easeful. The connections themselves felt more affirming and uplifting. It was as if my new energy signature, my clearer sense of self, was acting as a magnet for those who resonated on a similar wavelength. These interactions were a stark, refreshing contrast to the draining and often confusing encounters that had once been so common in my life. I was finding my true tribe. The most powerful lesson in all of this was realizing just how profoundly I was teaching others how to treat me. My own self-regard became the most effective instructor. When I began to truly value my time, others started to respect it more consistently. When I learned to speak my truth calmly, clearly, and without apology, my words were received differently. I was no longer unconsciously inviting disrespect by tolerating it, or by failing to voice my needs. My energy, my posture, my words, and my boundaries all combined to send a new, unequivocal message. I am worthy of respect, and I will accept nothing less. Aligning with opportunity, the universe conspires. As my internal energy solidified into this newfound strength and clarity, it felt as though the very fabric of my life began to shift. Opportunities started to present themselves, often from unexpected quarters. These weren't just any opportunities, they felt deeply resonant with the person I was becoming, aligned with my core values and my burgeoning sense of self-worth. It was as if by clearing out the internal clutter of self-doubt and fear, I had inadvertently made space for these fresh, invigorating possibilities to enter my life. Possibilities I might have once dismissed as being beyond my reach or undeserving of my attention. A remarkable sense of flow began to permeate my days. Those moments of synchronicity, of being in the right place at the right time, started to occur with noticeable frequency. Things just seemed to fall into place with a greater sense of ease and less forced effort. The constant uphill struggle, the feeling of swimming against a relentless current that had characterized so much of my past, began to gently subside. This emerging sense of flow wasn't about becoming passive or simply waiting for things to happen. It was about moving in harmony with my life's current, guided by that clearer inner knowing and trusting the path unfolding before me. It wasn't just people or job prospects. The very nature of the experiences that came my way started to reflect my internal growth. Challenges still arose, of course, for life is never a perfectly smooth journey. However, my perception of these challenges transformed. They no longer felt like insurmountable obstacles designed to confirm my inadequacies. Instead, they appeared as opportunities for further growth, chances to practice my newfound strength, to reinforce my boundaries, and to solidify my self-worth even more deeply. I was attracting situations that allowed me to step more fully into my power. Ultimately, I came to understand that this beautiful alignment wasn't some form of elusive magic, though it certainly felt magical at times. It was, in fact, the natural and logical consequence of operating from a place of increased clarity, unwavering confidence, and authentic self-expression. When you truly know what you want, when you understand and honor what you deserve, you naturally make different choices. You pursue different avenues. You project an entirely different energy into the world around you. And the world, in its own intricate and responsive way, cannot help but react to that newfound coherence and self-assuredness. Peace over chaos, the new baseline. The most profound and welcome change of all was the arrival of a deep, abiding inner peace, where chaos and anxiety had once held relentless sway. That frantic, restless energy, the constant internal turmoil that had been my unwelcome companion for so long, began to recede. It was like watching a turbulent tide slowly ebb away, revealing a calm, serene shore beneath. In its place, a quiet sense of peace settled deep within my being, a comforting presence that felt both novel and profoundly right. This peace wasn't just a fleeting emotion. It gradually established itself as my new baseline, the very foundation upon which I started to build my days. Life, of course, continued to present its inevitable challenges and occasional storms. Disappointments still occurred, and setbacks were still part of the human experience. However, my ability to navigate these difficulties transformed almost beyond recognition. I was no longer so easily capsized by adversity. The roots of my self-worth, now nourished and strengthened, ran much deeper, providing a resilient anchor in turbulent times. I found I could bend without breaking, face difficult situations with an inner fortitude and grace that often surprised even myself. Setbacks became valuable lessons, not damning verdicts on my adequacy or worth. Having experienced this profound sense of inner peace and unwavering self-respect, the mere thought of returning to the old ways of being became utterly intolerable. A fierce yet gentle protectiveness arose within me, a deep commitment to safeguarding this hard-won inner sanctuary. I became much more adept at quickly recognizing and consciously disengaging from situations, dynamics, or individuals that threatened to drain my precious energy or compromise my sense of worth. My tolerance for anything less than respectful, authentic, and reciprocal interactions plummeted. This wasn't about aggression or hostility, it was an act of sacred self-preservation. This remarkable shift in energy, this journey from disrespected to empowered, was not a temporary fix or a fleeting phase of personal development. It was, and continues to be, a fundamental reorientation of how I choose to live my life, how I relate to myself, and how I engage with the vast world around me. It is an ongoing practice, a daily recommitment to honoring my inherent worth and living from a place of authentic power. The journey undoubtedly continues, with new lessons to learn and new ways to grow. But now, my internal compass is firmly and irrevocably set towards peace, authenticity, and unwavering self-respect. Reclaiming your light and endless dawn. The path from feeling diminished to truly empowered is not a short stroll. It is a journey, often winding, sometimes steep, filled with inevitable challenges. Yet it is undoubtedly the most rewarding pilgrimage you will ever undertake in this lifetime. Taking your power back, piece by precious piece, fundamentally transforms everything you experience. It is not a final destination reached once and for all, a checkbox ticked off. Instead, it becomes a new way of walking through the world with intention, a conscious choice made each and every day to honor your spirit deeply. This journey is ongoing, a continuous, beautiful unfolding of your truest, most authentic self. It asks for your courage, your unwavering patience, and your steadfast commitment to you. Remember, Reclaiming your innate power rarely happens in one grand sudden sweep. It is not typically a single dramatic cinematic event that changes everything in an instant. Instead, this profound transformation unfolds through a consistent series of small, deliberate actions. It happens one boundary bravely drawn, even when your voice trembles. It happens one difficult truth spoken with a steady, quiet voice, honoring your reality. It happens one courageous decision made decisively in favor of your own heart's wisdom. Each of these individual moments, seemingly small and perhaps insignificant on its own, builds powerfully upon the last. They collectively create a powerful momentum, a steady, persistent climb towards your most authentic self. These tiny victories are the true, solid foundation of lasting, meaningful change. For so long, you might have carried the heavy belief that you were asking for too much. You might have internalized the damaging idea that your fundamental needs were a burden to others. Perhaps you felt that your voice, when you dared to use it, was somehow too loud or inconvenient. The profound truth is, you are not too much. You were never, ever too much. The real underlying issue was that you were likely giving far, far too little to yourself. Too little self-compassion in moments of struggle. Too little focused attention on your own well-being. Too little of the fierce, tender protection that your precious spirit so richly deserves. Reclaiming your power means courageously correcting this deep-seated imbalance. It means turning that boundless generosity inward, finally. It means nourishing your own soul as a sacred, non-negotiable duty. So now the invitation before you is crystal clear. It is truly, undeniably time to reclaim your inherent power. Understand that this incredible power is your birthright, something you were born with, waiting patiently within you for you to embrace it fully and without reservation. And once you have taken it back into your own hands, commit with all your heart to protecting it fiercely. Guard your inner peace as you would your most treasured possession. Honor your boundaries with unwavering consistency. Nurture your self-worth with daily acts of kindness and love directed towards yourself. This is not just about feeling incrementally better. It's about living a life that is authentically and unapologetically yours. It is about shining your unique light brightly in a world that desperately needs it. Your journey is yours alone to walk, but its beautiful impact will ripple outwards. Start today. If this message resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring videos.